In today's video, I'm going to show you how I deal with doll clothes that have started to flake, peel, or get sticky with age. So the fabrics I'm specifically referring to are the faux leathers, the pleathers, the vinyl, really shiny fabric on doll clothes that you typically associate with like faux leather or vinyl. This has been used for decades, like all the way back in probably the 70s they started using this. And if you have doll clothes that are around the 15-year mark, you might notice that this fabric starts to flake. And sometimes if you're really unlucky, it gets super sticky. And I've gotten questions about this in the past. The short answer here is that there's nothing you can do to stop this process or to reverse it once it started. Like anything else, this material gets old and the outer layer of it decays. And when this happens, it comes off. And that's just the nature of collecting older doll clothes. And I can't say for sure if the types of like faux leather, pleather, vinyl that they use on doll clothes now is exactly the same as it was back in the day, but I can tell you that from like the mid-2000s and older, this is what happens to this kind of material, and I imagine that it's also something that's going to happen with any faux leather or vinyl stuff that you get now. Now, some people's solution is to simply replace the item. Like if, say, they have a faux leather Ken jacket and it starts to flake, they'll just buy another one that's identical. But the truth of the matter is that all of these materials will at some point have this problem. You can get lucky if something maybe was in a better climate or wasn't played with as much or wasn't washed or, you know, was opened up out of the box and had like more fresh air exposure. Sometimes you can get lucky and it'll take a long time for this process to begin. It can be delayed, but it's going to happen at one point or another. So replacing the item is just a short-term solution. I have gotten dolls that were sealed in their box that had like the worst case of this. My 1986 Super Hair Barbie comes to mind. I bought her in the flea market in 2012. She's box dated 1986, so it wasn't even quite 30 years. I went to like touch her, and as soon as I touched her in the tray, like all of the white faux leather like came off on my hands. So keeping them boxed doesn't make a difference. Sometimes it can accelerate this process. And as soon as you start handling this material to like dress your dolls, it's gonna like just start flaking off even worse. You can put off treating it for a little while, but there is going to come a point where it is flaking all over the place and it gets really sticky and nasty, and it's just going to contaminate any other clothes or any other dolls in the vicinity. Although you can't reverse the clock, you can't prevent this process, there are ways that you can still use the item. Underneath those sorts of fabrics, the faux leather, vinyl, the fake deer skin, there is fabric underneath. It's basically coated with something on top, and that coating is what falls apart, not the fabric underneath. So if you are lucky and this happens, say you have a black fake leather jacket, the fabric underneath will be black. So I'll show you how I remove like the flakes and the stickiness and make it so it's not creating a mess anymore. Once you remove that and let it dry, the item can just function as it would before. It just won't look like fake leather, it'll just look like a black jacket. Now if you're unlucky, like in the case with my red vinyl jumpers, they are red on the outside, but underneath they are white. Now you can still use this item being white, but it won't look anything like how it originally did. So I'm going to show you how I fix the color so that it looks closer to the original. And I've done this on a lot of different doll clothes over the past 5 or 6 years. And I've experimented and figured out like what did and didn't work. Now of course you can use fabric dye. I'm sure someone in the comments will suggest that. I've played around with dyes before, not for this specifically, but like with other doll outfits that have lost coloring. And dye is really tricky to work with. It's hard to know exactly what shade it's going to turn out to be. It can come out splotchy. It can be hard finding the right dye for the specific fabric because a lot of dyes aren't made for synthetic materials. I like to use paint. You can buy fabric paint. I'll show you some outfits I use fabric paint on so you can see the difference. But I actually usually just buy regular acrylic paint and a fabric medium. Basically just helps the paint dry more flexibly. I'll also use this medium when I'm painting like the vinyl heads of dolls that are squishy. So it's just not as rigid. You don't have to use it, but if you use straight acrylic paint, you're probably gonna end up with some rigidity when the item dries. And you're probably thinking, well, acrylic paint is water soluble, won't that just come out? No. As someone who has painted a lot and accidentally gotten paint on my clothes, and if you've painted with acrylic paint, then you know, once it's like on the fabric, unless you wipe it off like straight away, it's gonna stain. And it's great for this process. And the nice thing is it doesn't stain the threads. If the threads are like a contrast color, you'll still be able to see the contrast color. You'll see this with some of the items I show. It's not going to be 100% perfect. It's not going to look 100% original, but at least you can still use the item, especially if it's like a sentimental piece from childhood or something. Bear in mind, this is just my personal technique. This is just what's worked for me over the years. I'm sure there's like other things you can do. Always do your research. So without further ado, let's get into video. So the main example I'm going to use in this video are these two Girl of Today red vinyl jumpers that we had growing up. They came on Angela and Valerie. One of them we got for Christmas '99, the other one Colleen got for her birthday in February 2000. So they are the same age, and as you can see, they've really begun peeling. These were fine up until a few years ago, probably when they were around the little over 20-year mark, and now they are sticky, not super bad, but getting sticky, and all of this damage happened just from us dressing them when we were taking pictures of them in these outfits, so it's pretty bad. And there's just really no way to keep this original material. It's just going to keep getting worse and worse. And you can see the issue is that it's all white underneath. So once I get rid of this red, it's going to be white underneath, and that's just not going to give the same effect. So I am going to have to remove all of this red. So it's really important that you remove all of the previous material as best you can. I do have some shoes I'm going to show in this video that they were really difficult to get like 100% of it off without damaging the material underneath. But if you can, get rid of all of it, because anything left on is going to become an issue when you go to paint, and it's going to affect the finished texture. And usually with like fabric, something that's not on a shoe, that's just solid fabric, you are going to be able to get it all off even if it takes several soaks. So I'm going to show you what I use to deal with this. So I have a little tub here. This is my laundry tub. I recommend, because it's going to take a few hours to soak these, I would recommend getting a container rather than using your sink where water might drain out of, or it's going to, be inconvenient if you need to use your sink. You're going to want warm to hot water. Now, this isn't dye. This is obviously like an outer layer that's flaking off. So normally I wash doll clothes in cold water so that the dye doesn't bleed out unless I'm trying to remove a stain. But in this case, you want the hot water because it's going to help all of this peel off. And you're going to want to use an oxygen-based cleaner. I have OxyClean here. You do not need to use the name brand. I used to buy the dollar store kind until it literally stopped working for some reason. I don't know if like my store kept getting bad batches or they reformulated, but it's an oxygen-based cleaner. They do have cleaners like this in other countries. Just look up oxygen-based cleaner. What's in it is some kind of peroxide. That's what makes it bubble. That's why they call it OxyClean, because it bubbles. And this helps with the stickiness that comes along with this material peeling. I use OxyClean for removing stickiness on the dolls themselves and the accessories. So yeah, I really like it. I have it around for a lot of things, even for cleaning things in the house. So you're gonna see that like a lot of this is already flaking off, but if you try to dry peel it, it's gonna be very time consuming. and you're probably not going to be able to get it all off. So I'm going to start filling this up with warm to hot water. Usually when I wash doll clothes, I don't have like an excess of extra water, but you do want quite a bit of water when you soak these items, just to help with all the crumb removal. And then I'm going to take this little scoop. This is probably like a little more than a tablespoon. So I have my little toothbrush that I use for cleaning dolls. It's their toothbrush. I don't use this for myself. And I'm just going to really gently, especially where you can see there are stitches, that tends to be the more stubborn areas. And also, you want to make sure you check the inside where like the fabric is hemmed, because that is also going to be peeling. And you don't want to be dealing with all of the little flakes. Now you don't want to use like a scrub brush too aggressively, because you can damage the fabric. Usually this kind of coated fabric is a little bit delicate. This is obviously, this was made for a higher quality doll and they're bigger scale, so this is pretty thick, but it's not always, and you don't want to like have at it and mess up the fabric underneath, so just be careful. And this is a soft bristled toothbrush, it's not hard bristled. If you do have a hard bristled one, it's not the end of the world, just like, you know, be gentle. You can see how easily the stuff is peeling. It was getting all over the other things in the bag with it, because obviously this is a whole outfit that comes with tights and shoes and long sleeve shirt. Yeah, if you don't take care of it, it's just eventually going to make everything messy. I'm probably not even going to have these soak because of how compliant it's being, but like I said, it's totally normal if it is being a little bit stubborn, if the fabric feels really sticky and you need to let it soak. Sometimes you might even need to change the water and add more OxiClean. Coming out quite nicely. You can see like the little hemline even on the inside of the seam. You want to make sure you check that. Otherwise, you'll go to dress your doll after you fix it and you'll be like, where are these flakes coming from? And they're nasty. It's like glitter. They stick to everything. Alright, so I didn't have to let these soak. I just was able to work it all off myself. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to rinse these really, really well, because you can see there's crumbs sticking to it. These aren't still adhered to the fabric, but it's just a very messy process. So I'm just going to rinse them really thoroughly. And you can see, like, I was very careful about getting around all of the stitches, little snaps. These jumpers have more details than a lot of other doll clothes, so on a standard like Barbie jacket, you're probably not going to have as many fiddly features to work around. And make sure you rinse out the inside really well too. So if you did happen to miss some during the soak, it should just all come off. So now I'm going to wring these out and I'm going to hang them to air dry. You might find the stray piece of material, that's fine. It'll shake off once it's dry. Just try to get as much of it off as possible. And I hang these to air dry completely, and I'll check in with you once these are dry enough to move to the next step. It's several hours later. The jumpers are completely dry. You can see no more of that red peely stuff anywhere on them. So what you're going to need, if you're not using fabric paint, I will show you how to use fabric paint, like how that works on a different thing in this video, but for now I'm going to show you how I mix acrylic paint. So I have this really big bottle of red, and it's just standard cheap acrylic paint. I always use the Apple Barrel brand. And then this is the fabric medium I have. It's by the Americana brand. I got this at Michael's years ago. This you're going to mix, it says 2 to 1. I usually kind of eyeball it and it turns out fine. And then I'm going to use a really big bad boy to paint this because it's a lot of surface area. It's best to just use like a color straight from the bottle, because especially with something of this size, and I have 2 of them, like if I run out, I can just go to Walmart and buy this color, whereas if I was mixing it and say I got like halfway done painting and then I needed to mix up another batch, it might not completely match, and there might be like several different shades of red, and then if you paint over the part you already did in a different shade, it won't ever be really even. It's not the end of the world, but I do think this just makes life easier. Now these jumpers are pretty straightforward because they are all solid red, and they do have these like metal snap closures and zippers, but if I get any paint on those things, it'll wipe right off once it's dry with some rubbing alcohol. Now there might be outfits you have that are like reversible, or they have some other attached feature that wasn't made of the faux leather. In that case, you're gonna have to get pretty creative about like separating it so that you don't accidentally get paint on it, but that could happen. And you can, if you feel more comfortable, you can make like a little insert here, like out of a piece of cardboard, so to like put under here to keep the top and bottom separated. I've done that in the past. Now this is all red, so it doesn't matter, but like let's say the back was a different color, you'd want to do that because the paint is going to soak right through these layers. I don't care about the pockets because they're on the inside and they're red, but like if it was a different color on the back, then you'd probably want to do that. But you want to use a cardboard that doesn't have like the side that doesn't have like something printed on it, like a cereal box for instance. The cereal box logo will peel off on the wet paint, so you don't want to do that. And you can use like a silicone mat to paint on. I like to use cardboard because it soaks up the paint. Like you can see there's some pink here from earlier when I did a Mary-Kate and Ashley outfit. Whereas on silicone, it's kind of just gonna sit there and take longer to dry, and then you risk like getting accidental paint transfer on things. And this is thick, so as long as you kind of pick it up before you leave it to dry and make sure everything is separated, it's not gonna like stick. So I'm gonna use a paint palette. Usually if I'm painting doll stands, I'll just mix my paint on the cardboard, but this fabric soaks up paint so much that you don't want the cardboard to soak up any of the paint that you want to use. You want to get all your mileage out of the paint. So I'm gonna go and make like a pretty big batch. And I'm just gonna mix it all together, and then I'm just gonna start painting. Just gonna feel a little sacrilegious at first. And any flakes you see are from the paint itself, not from the material that came off of this. And I actually think that this is a pretty good color match now that I'm seeing it. And you're just gonna do a thin coat. Although you're gonna use a bunch of paint for this process, you're not gonna have to do a second coat more than likely because the fabric absorbs it so well. As long as you take your time in each section and make sure you've spread it out evenly, it has great coverage. You don't want to glob it on too much either. You don't want the paint getting too stiff. So just work in small areas at a time. You can see I got some on the zipper, but it comes right off. I didn't film like all of me painting because it's tedious and I did 2 jumpers in one session, but I am making sure not to leave any splotchy white areas behind. You'll see I keep going back occasionally and adding more paint. That is really where you want to spend your time, and getting along the edges where the seams are and any little folds, because that'll show as white and dry against the red and look weird. And because this fabric is so thick, usually it'll soak into the inside too. You can see it has in parts, so I'm just gonna go on the inside so it doesn't look splotchy. I mean, you're not gonna see that, so you don't have to do this step, but I just want it to look kind of inconspicuous. Alright, to finish with the second jumper, shockingly I had enough red paint, and I was most concerned about running out of this, but there's still some in there because I can't just go pick that up at Walmart like I could the red paint. Normally I would just dry these on cardboard, and the important thing is to kind of lift it up and probably move it over to a different section of the cardboard that didn't have damp paint on it, and just make sure to like fluff it up so the two pieces of fabric don't get stuck to each other. But I'm actually gonna hang this on my drying rack using the straps just so it dries a little bit better. And once this is all dry, I'll show you what it looks like and how I kind of clean up these details. These shoes were from Molly's recital outfit. It was a eBay purchase Colleen got not long before, and the shoes looked fine when they arrived, but after putting them on her Molly doll and then changing it onto a different Molly doll, the shoes started to crack, one of them really badly, to the point where you couldn't even get it onto the doll. So even though one shoe wasn't as bad as the other, I had no choice but to get this off because she couldn't even use it. So, unfortunately, American Girl shoes are not as straightforward as the regular clothes for like Barbie or American Girl, because they do have like different components like a rubber sole and then some kind of like paperboard or something on the inside. And this material was not coming off easily. It was coming off enough to make a mess and make it so you couldn't use the shoes, but it wasn't just peeling off nicely in clumps, and the fabric underneath was actually really cheap. So you can see here I was trying to, without soaking, wipe it off, but it wasn't working at all for me. So you are going to see I do have to soak them, which isn't ideal, but it didn't damage or warp the soles. So I have a little bit of OxyClean in this tiny dish, and I'm putting some warm water. And I tried to put the shoes upside down in the bowl so that the little cardboard soles and stuff were pointing up, and I only let them sit for maybe 20 minutes tops, and I kept checking on them, and I would take them out and kind of try to massage off as much of the stuff as possible. At this point you can see the rubber sole on one of them peeled off, but these are easy to glue back on, so don't worry. So after letting the shoes completely dry, I set out to restore the color. Unfortunately, the layer underneath did not have the same cream tone, and I had to buy a special bottle of paint just to match. I did put some tin foil in the shoes to help them hold their shape. It wasn't necessary, but I was just kind of afraid with how floppy they were that the shoes might not hold their shape, and if the two like wet pieces of fabric touched and dried that way, they would stick together. So I thought just putting tinfoil where it would easily peel off the tinfoil when it dried, I thought that this would be make it easier, and it did. So I mixed equal parts of paint and fabric medium together, and then I just applied it generously. Now the nice thing about this process is you usually only have to do one coat, because the fabric just absorbs it so well, unless you happen to miss a spot, but usually one coat, it makes it opaque enough. I did have to be careful around these little pink bows. They were too small to really tape off, but I was able to avoid getting paint on them. I was kind of nervous about that. And you'll see that the texture looks a little bit rough, and that's because I had a real beast of a time getting all of that like fake Mary Jane type material. I don't really know what it was supposed to be, like a fake vinyl or something. I had a real time getting it off, and some of the like white coating on the base of the shoe also came off, which I fix off camera later too. But I did even remove the foil at some point so I could paint this base. But even though it's not totally smooth, I thought of a way I could kind of mask that later on, which you'll see. What I showed in the bottle was Liquitex gloss varnish. So obviously with fabric you wouldn't need to seal it because this isn't gonna like flake off. However, my issue was that I wanted these shoes to be shiny, and I didn't have the gloss version of this paint, and also I feel like because of how the fabric absorbs it, it doesn't really dry quite shiny enough. And I also did want them to be stiffer so that they would hold their shape better and be easier to put on the dolls. So I built up several layers of this gloss varnish, letting it dry amply between each coat. I did, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 coats, and I made sure to make them pretty thick and spread them out evenly. So here I'm showing how I use fabric paint. So this is actually paint that's designed for fabric on some Mary-Kate and Ashley fashion pack items that were a really cool looking fake pink leather originally, and I did have one of the purses that was still in good shape, but ironically most of what I'm painting here came from a boxed set that I bought off of eBay in 2021. It was part of a lot, and as soon as I took them out of the box, the back parts of the outfit that had been lightly glued to the back of the package with some very like not strong adhesive, it literally caused it all to peel on the back. So as soon as I got these items, they needed to have the coating removed, and I kept meaning to make this video, but I continued to put it off. That's why it took me so long to finally paint them. So you don't need to mix anything in with fabric paint. It is a little bit runnier, at least this brand is. I feel like I used other brands in the past that were thicker and harder to work with, but this was pretty runny, and I didn't feel like the color was too strong. Unfortunately, the exact pink shade of the original faux leather was very difficult to match. I had looked at so many different kinds of paint. That's also part of why I procrastinated on this. I kept buying different bottles of paint at Walmart and bringing them home to compare to the existing purse I had that still had the fabric, and none of them quite matched. This is a little bit less saturated and has more of an orange undertone, whereas the original one has a slight purple undertone, but honestly, this is probably the best I'm going to get, and I'd way rather have them be a slightly different shade of pink and look cool than be this sickly white color. And this is what I mean about the stitching still being visible. Like, you can see I'm going ham with the paint, and you can very clearly see the green stitches while the paint is wet even then, so you can still appreciate the accent details. It's not like this is going to completely mask all of the original stitches, which is nice because that pop of green is a cool detail. It's important when you do paint clothes, before you set them out to dry, you can see I stuck the end of the paintbrush into the sleeves. You don't want the wet paint to make the clothing stick to itself. This happened to me one of the first times I attempted this. Sometimes you can make like a little cutout thing to put in the clothing item, kind of like a cardboard paper doll, to help it hold its shape, but honestly then you run the risk of the cardboard sticking to the fabric, which is way worse to deal with. So I find just taking a paintbrush or a pen and poking it up helps. So the stuff I painted has dried overnight, and the Mary-Kate and Ashley items that I did with fabric paint, they are not stiff. However, I have used different brands of fabric paint in the past that do dry kind of stiff. This was very like watery. However, it smells a lot like acrylic paint, so that's why I'm going to be washing these. And these aren't like insanely stiff. These were more rigid to begin with, but they are a little bit stiff, and they smell very strongly of acrylic paint just because of how big they are. So this is what I like to do. You don't have to do this step. These are perfectly fine to be put on dolls. So I have my little laundry tub in here with some homemade laundry detergent. I'm going to soak these in warm water, and I'm not a huge fan of fabric softener. You have to be mindful when you're using it, whether it's on dryer sheets or the liquid form, because it's basically like a coating that goes on clothes. I do want to soften up this just a little bit. It's really not that bad, and this smells really good. So I'm just going to plop them in, and I'm going to take a really small amount of fabric softener, and I'm going to make sure that it's like fully diluted. I'm going to fill this up with warm water and let them soak for a little while, maybe an hour at most. After I soaked these jumpers in the warm water, laundry detergent, and fabric softener mixture, most of the paint came off the metal components like the snaps and the zippers, but there was still some residual red paint that had gotten on them. So I took some isopropyl alcohol, aka rubbing alcohol, that I showed at the start of this clip, and a pointed Q-tip, and this lifts the paint off like perfectly, and it's not gonna take it off of the fabric itself. I always use this for cleanup when I'm working with acrylic paint. It works wonderfully, and it dries super fast. This is the 70% kind, so it dries faster. The higher the percentage, the quicker it dries. And this isn't for like disinfecting purposes. I'm literally just cleaning up the zippers, and I kept kind of going back and forth. I also made sure I could unzip the zippers. Not that I really use them for anything, but I just wanted to make sure there wasn't any paint like clogging up the little teeth of the zippers. And this only took a few minutes. I did speed up the footage a little bit, but it was just a finishing step to make it look a bit more complete, tie it in a bit better, make it look more original. Alright, so I have the finished products. So these are Molly's recital shoes. They're on my sister's first Molly. Now these were difficult to put on her, which is part of what made them peel in the first place, because one of her feet is slightly bigger than the other. The Pleasant Company dolls tend to have like pretty big feet. But I was able to get them on. One of them went on very easily, the other one not so much, but it didn't crack or flake or anything, and you can see they're relatively shiny. The surface is still somewhat bumpy, and this is what I mean about like trying to get off all of the original material, but these shoes were pretty flimsy underneath that like patent leather. Unfortunately, I was left with a kind of rough surface, but there you can wear them now, and from a distance they look fine. The two red vinyl jumpers. The interesting thing is when I soaked these, they did bleed out some red, but that was because these pockets underneath are like a plastic material that the paint didn't stick to. So when it got wet, acrylic paint is obviously water-based, so when the water hit it, all of the paint that was on the pockets came off. So it's actually a really good thing that I wanted to soak these anyways. And also most of what was on the metal came off when I soaked it. So when that happened, I let it sit for a couple minutes, rinsed everything really good until the red stopped coming out, and then soaked them again. And these are not as stiff as they were. I could go over them again if I wanted like a really dark red, but honestly I think they look fine. The fact that they're not like super dark red kind of makes them look more aged. And then these are the Mary Kate and Ashley pieces that I painted. This didn't bleed at all in the wash, and these already dried soft. That's because that was this brand of paint, fabric paint. However, this brand of fabric paint that I used in the past, this stuff dried really stiff. Not all fabric paints are going to dry insanely flexible. It's not a perfect color match by any means, but at least they're not white, and you can see the stitching on this was already red, but the stitching on this was like a neon green, like you can see in the pattern of this purse. You can definitely still see the green stitching, which is great. And this fabric was thinner, so I didn't have to paint the inside of these at all. When I painted the back, it soaked through. So most of the time you don't have to like do any painting on the lining. These were just higher quality, thicker, had more like components, but you can see I did make sure that they were red on the inside. So They're not perfect. I'm not claiming that they are, but at least they sort of resemble what they're supposed to. My dolls can wear them, and yeah, it captures somewhat of the original essence of them. I hope you enjoyed this video and that it could maybe answer some questions about why this happens and give you a way to troubleshoot it so you can still use your sticky, peeling, flaking doll clothes. And until next time, love your dolls, love yourself, and love your life.